All right, we're burning the midnight oil here. That's why my face is on this thing too. So I recorded this one time already, and thing got totally screwed up. So we're doing different. I'm just doing straight up PowerPoint software this time so that I can save it. So anywho, here's what we got. Um, we got. I think it's working, right? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we've got Unit 3, and we're gonna go through the things that we need. So urban environments, and this is the variety of urban environments. This has the most content, I think, of theme G, paper one, IB geography. So we'll go through that quick, and it should be okay. Sorry, I'm gonna get stuck looking at myself. So we started with that, which was like, what is an urban environment? So first thing we're thinking about is what are some common characteristics of an urban environment, or what makes a place an urban area? And there's a couple things. So it's obviously population based. So you need a large resident population. Usually, what's considered large depends on from place to place. So it could be 1,000 or more in Australia, or 5,000, 50,000 or more in. I think I have a typo there. I think it should be 50,000 in India. We in Boise, in Renaissance High School in Boise, Idaho. We're technically Meridian, so it's a city of about like 230,000 people. That's considered a big city. Is it truly urban compared to other places in America? That remains to be seen. And then the economic activity is the other thing that you see. So you see a movement away from primary activities, which would be rural based activities. So things like farming and mineral mining and things like that. To secondary and tertiary markets, such as industry, commercial, retail, services, technology, things of that nature. It also would be dormitory settlements for economic function. Um, yeah, so some characteristics would be population size, specific features like a central business district, industrial zones, different nuclei or different cultural centers around it, and then it also has the predominant economic activities of an area. Finally, you'll probably see some administrative or government functions in that place. Or if watch that, I'm going to skip that for now. Okay, we talked about two things right away. The first was site, and the second one was situation. So the site is the land that the settlement's actually built on, and then the situation is the position or refers to a relationship to the surrounding area. So site, situation, and there's certain things from a physical geographic standpoint that would make a place a positive place or a physically attractive place to build on. So first is whoa, readily available water, fresh water. And again, a lot of these relate to climate. Climate kind of like overarches over these things. So don't freak out that climate's not on there. Safety from flooding. You don't want to be on a super low coastal flooding plain because that's going to be a problem, especially in the future as ocean levels rise. But you also want level sites to build on. So you don't want to be on a completely rocky, jagged area. Super high elevation can be a difficult obstacle sometimes as well. You also want something for construction and fuel. That's a little less pertinent these days because of globalization and the ability to ship and transport things in a high income country, especially. South facing slopes in the north and north facing slopes in the global south. Proximity to rich soils, having fertile soils is going to be really, really important to at least begin settlements. And then potential for trade, having a lot of infrastructure, and those are the big things. Sorry, you might want to go back to that one and stop it there, and then make sure you know what those site characteristics are. We also talked about function. So you got site and you've got function. Function is what does the urban area actually do? What is the purpose of it? What functions does it serve? So there's a couple different ones. Most urban areas have an industrial role and they have a service role, but they also will have some type of residential role component as well. People typically live there. Usually we'll see some type of vertical zoning of buildings and having residential areas on the top of buildings, or just having specific sections that are set up for rental housing. You might have ownership homeowners as well. A little less common though. Land use is in several ways in urban areas. So we call this land use. It's how to use the land. The three big ones that we talked about that you can kind of lump everything into are residential, industrial, and then retail slash commercial. So retail is like shopping, commercial is more like specific secondary or tertiary services that you would do. But there's several other things that a city might be zoned to be doing. So there could be specific services, there could be government services, there could be institutions, you could have recreation centers, you might have open green spaces, parks, gardens, sports facilities, rivers, like areas for being on the river, for example, or a lake, body of water, and then markets, which is usually for bringing agricultural goods. For example, the state of Texas, like a lot of big roads are called farm to market. Basically, it was a road that connected the farming community to where the market would actually be in the city. Fun fact for you from my brief time in Texas. Well, let's talk about land use models. So I'm going to get to that in a second. But then there's also this issue of the central business district. It's a key characteristic of an urban area that you're going to want to make sure that you know. And the central business district is the commercial and economic core of a city, because I still haven't fixed the O into of yet. So it's usually most accessible by public transport. It generally has the highest land values. It's usually a clustering of similar types of businesses. In Boise, Idaho, it's usually around the capital in the north, and then, well, north east, sort of. And then you've got down to Myrtle, down to the south or the southwest, because it kind of hits on a diagonal. And then like 8th Street would be like smack dab in the middle. Here's some characteristics. I'm not going to go through every single one. You can pause me and take a look at those if you'd like, but they're going to have specific characteristics that are important to the central business district, or the CBD. There's a couple. You got Boise first and then Meridian. We talked about 3 types of land use models that you really need to know. I'm going to talk about this one, and then I'll briefly touch on the other ones because you were looking at those yourself. But the first one is the Burgess model, which is concentric zones. So the idea here is that the central business district is kind of like a bullseye in the center, and then you create these concentric loops around the city. And as you get further and further out, you tend to have more and more residential areas, and you tend to suburbanize over time. And then you will have lower land values in general as you get farther out. So there it is right there, concentric circles. Better quality housing exists, and the cost there is the commute. So now if you're going to work in the central business district, you're going to need to commute longer distances. So there's what it looks like again. These ones have specific roles or functions that have developed as you get farther and farther out. We also talked about the Hoyt sector model, which is where you almost kind of carve it up instead of in circles as like pieces of a pie, and they have different roles and different land uses. And they have the multiple nuclei model, which is where you actually have like several mini central business districts that are all around the place. And then we also looked at some non-Western models as well, but the 3 big ones were the multiple nuclei, the Hoyt sector model, and the Burgess concentric zones. We also talked about the hierarchy of settlements. So what does that mean? It means that there's different sizes of settlements, and as a place gets larger in population, where the size grows, you're going to see different types of uses and purposes for that area. So we talked, the 2 big concepts here were range and threshold. So when you're talking about a settlement or an urban area, and it fits in with sports, leisure, and tourism as well, but you think about how far people want to go in order to access a good or service in an area, and then how many people you need to sustain that place. And what that yields is kind of the economic activities of different settlements. So you get these low order goods where they're kind of convenience goods that people usually travel long way for if they need them, and you generally need a lower threshold to support them. And then you have these lower range, higher threshold things, which are luxury goods. So you can usually tell what a settlement is or what a city is based on what types of goods they have. Big urban areas will tend to have both lower and higher order goods, whereas rural suburban areas will tend to focus more on the lower order goods. Sphere of influence is a way of understanding the reach of a city's culture, government, and economic activities. So if you think of a place like, again, where I am in Idaho, if you're someone from some other school watching this, we live in the Treasure Valley, and you've got Boise as kind of like the center hub, and then its sphere of influence can be felt all across the state, but especially when you think about Meridian, people commuting back and forth or going there on weekends, all the way out to Eagle, out to Nampa, like people being fans of Boise State or going to Boise for like specific restaurants, or you have like, for example, there's coffee shops that open locations in other cities outside of Boise that started in Boise. Those are all good examples of a sphere of influence. So it's just kind of spreading out your culture. or economic activity. We have a couple different terms here. Just gotta make sure you know what those are. Millionaire city, mega city, regular city, hamlet, village town, market town are kind of all, they're not the same, but they're very similar. And then conurbation is a weird one. It's where a city kind of starts to eat another city. Um, Kind of the whole reason behind all of this is that you can start to think about what do we know about people traveling, migrating, and the different types of economic activities that would occur in these places. So that was our conclusion. A lot of places, like in villages or small towns, are going to have a small number of people to support businesses. And they're going to have like a sphere of influence just really briefly in a short amount of area. Whereas in the urban areas, you have a wider range of higher order goods and low order goods together. People aren't going to want to travel as far for certain things within that city, but you're going to need generally more people to sustain them. We also talked about the big three types, or sorry, the reasons for urban growth. So this is called development, processes of development. So commercial, usually towns provide the market and exchange centers. Urban areas become a commercial hub for the surrounding area. Urban areas provide stimulus for development of employment opportunities for industry. Urban areas provide a focus for a lot of like people when you go to another state or something and you meet somebody and you've never met before, they ask you where you're from. Instead of, if you don't say Idaho, if you say want to be more specific, you probably say Boise. That's like a political sentiment. You probably aren't going to say like, I'm from Eagle, which is just north of Meridian, which is northwest of Boise. Like that would be too confusing in the scale level of things. So administratively, they kind of provide urban areas, urban areas provide economies of scale for health and education. So they usually have services that they provide as well. And socially, it's kind of ends up having people kind of weaken ties to traditional rural beliefs, and kind of you see this like mixing of cultures. Growth processes, they're spontaneous. Most places are going to have spontaneous growth, and then they will start to plan it outwardly after that. So most things start because there are things where there are positive attributes that are attractive for growing an urban area, and they grow spontaneously. And then there's also elements of planning, though you can also have true planned communities where you have corporations, local governments plan the development. So growth processes is another characteristic of urban environments. I already did that. Sorry, I don't know why that's like that. Economic activities. We read an article. Make sure you understand what the three types of urban activities are. They're retail, commercial, and industrial. And then you also have residential is not an economic activity, but it's a function of a city. We want to look at what physical factors impact those. You also should know what the bid rent curve is. The bid rent curve is part of land bid rent theory, which is just the idea that the central business district or some area, it's typically the central business district, will be where the highest land values typically are. And then depending on what type of land use we're talking about, you're going to kind of have this line that curves down, and it's going to curve at a different slope depending on how quickly the price of land drops as you get farther from the central business district. So for commercial retail, it's going to drop very quickly as you get farther away because people want to be where there's the most quote unquote footfall, where the most people are going to be. And then residential, it's going to be a much more level slope because people will be willing to pay more to live out of the urban area. Okay, it's not going to drop off too much because people want to buy houses. And then industry's kind of in between. What else? Oh, and then we talked about a couple intro to issues of urban environments. So we talked about poverty and deprivation. This is a key characteristic of urban environments. Usually you have an increased amount per capita, maybe density wise, of deprivation and exclusion for people. And there's different ways they can feel that. Physically, you can look at the quality of housing, levels of pollution, basically physical urban stress. You could also look at social stress, so crime, lack of healthcare access, the education levels. These are all things that you did for your urban diagnosis project. You can look at different elements of urban stress that are going to come up later. Economic would be unemployment rates, income levels, poverty rates. Things like that. And then political typically is political alienation or disenfranchisement. So voter participation, involvement, community organizations. Two key issues where we're talking about informal things. So things that are not generally set up well and regulated. So one is slums and squatter settlements, which is informal housing. So mostly in the United States, you have durable housing that's pretty well regulated, and a lot of low income and middle income countries, you'll start to get this informal housing that are not permanent structures. And they aren't providing typically sufficient clean water or living space for people to be considered slums. Usually there's not access to sanitation facilities. Usually it's not super secure. This makes up about 32% of the world's urban population living in something that's could be considered a slum. There you go. I got a lot of statistics. So typically located land planners don't want is the big thing. It's an element of power here. Informal economic activity is a little bit different. So that's where in a economy, in a nation, you have formal economy, which is all the things that are generally regulated. You have wage laws, labor laws, work laws, workplace environment laws, taxation, all those things. And in the informal economy, you have things that are less regulated. Sometimes they call them under the table, where it's not a regulated industry. People might not be paying taxes. The work might not be regulated specifically. So they're often small in scale. There's two big types. There's the bazaar economy, which happens a lot in low and middle income countries, where you have these small trade and service establishments, kind of like at a market with these different craft workshops. They're often owned by families. And these are, again, pretty unregulated, informal. You also have the street economy, which makes up several different concepts, but one of them being illegal goods, so counterfeit, trafficking, potentially drugs, narcotics, things of that nature. In the United States, this is what you get mostly when we talk about the informal economy is the drug running and things of that nature. You don't have a big informal bazaar economy. It's usually pretty regulated by governments. There you go. It is important for improving the economic standing of people, but it also leaves a lot of opportunity for exploitation. All right, we did a little application there. That was before. There was a good TED talk about this you could check out. And then finally, the very last thing before Finian stops me from making this video is there was a case study assignment where you compared Nairobi, Kenya and New York City, New York. So you could look at the different types of deprivation and issues of housing there. That could be helpful as a comparison for low income and high income countries. That's the end of topic 1 for urban environments. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Smash that like button. Let's keep those likes higher than those dislikes. Okay, peace.